Okay, so just to be clear at the very start of the video, these are my changes, like the personal changes that I would make to these vehicles if I had the power to make the changes, if that makes sense. These are not real changes, these are just like what I would do if I had the power, pretty much. So yeah, with that out of the way, on to the actual video itself. How's it going, everybody? This is DeanoGTO, and today we're going to be talking about the 60TB DeanoGTO in comparison to the E100, T110E4, and Object 705A. So to be more exact on what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be going over how I would change the 705A, the T110E4, and the E100 to make them more competitive with the new guy, the 60TB. So to go over like why exactly I'm doing this here, the 60TB has the best accuracy of these sort of caliber guns. Well, aside from T110E4, but T110E4 has other problems that I'll get to. And the only real thing it sacrifices in comparison is it has 0.1 worse aiming time than the T110E4 and the E100, and 0.2 worse than the 705A. Those are really the only weaknesses that it has gun-wise in comparison to those other vehicles. Also, it has an incredibly powerful turret with just immense rounding, sloping, and just raw armor thickness. Plus, it has only one real actual exposed weakness on the top, and it's really not that big when you compare it to something like the E100 weakness, which is not as tall, but it is really wide. So just in general, this thing here is basically going to wind up being primarily played as a hull down heavy tank. And it does have its weaknesses like the lower front plate and things like that, and it also has the weakness of the roof armor being 50mm instead of being more than that, because 50mm, if you don't know, that basically means it will be overmatchable for guns of this caliber and higher. So this thing here has a 152mm gun. It will be able to overmatch its own turret and penetrate it without needing to do a penetration check. Meanwhile, something like the E100 will not be able to do that, because the E100's gun is exactly 150mm in terms of caliber. Meanwhile, the 60TB has 152. So that 2mm caliber difference basically means that this thing won't be able to overmatch, whereas this thing will be able to. And it's the same sort of story with the 705A and T110E4. So this thing here I honestly reckon will be the most powerful 750 Alpha sort of heavy tank assault gun sort of vehicle at tier 8, or not tier 8, at tier 10. So in order to try and make the other vehicles more competitive, I'm going to go over how I would buff them in order to make them competitive with the 60TB. So the first one's relatively simple. There's only a couple wee changes that I would make. First thing, for the E100, I would up the side armor on the turret, and this is the only armor change that I would make, from 150mm, like it is right now, as you can see, to 185 or 200, but I think 200 would be pushing it. The reason why is just to like encourage people to angle their turret in order to like deflect premium rounds, because one thing that's always been a massive problem for the E100 is basically this is the angle, this is the sort of angle you want to have the front turret, the front of the turret at in order to deflect premium rounds, but that makes the side armor on the turret incredibly susceptible to premium rounds. So upping this here by 35mm or 50mm if you were to go full on like just insane with it, I think would just make this tank infinitely more playable for people in today's meta. I don't think it's a good idea to just up the front armor thickness, because I don't want another Type 4, Type 5 heavy. I just think it's a good idea to up the side armor, because people are already used to doing that on this vehicle, rather than upping the frontal armor, because I think the frontal armor being too thick on this thing could cause more problems than it solves. Next thing, the E100 actually has a lower DPM in a less mobile vehicle with, I would argue, a significantly worse turret. So basically what I would say is the DPM on this machine, like the best possible DPM without using food, I think should probably be around 2,888. Which basically works out as 3.85 second, or no, not 3.85 second, 3.85 round per minute rate of fire with a 15.6 second reload. So basically it takes like about 0.9 seconds off of the overall reload on the gun at the moment, and it basically gives it like a half a second reload advantage over the 60TP. I honestly think that would probably be the only real way to make this thing competitive with 60TP, because it will give it like a roughly around a 90 DPM advantage, and it would give it just a chance to be able to get a shot off before the 60TP in a close range fight, rather than the 60TP being able to just face hug the E100, and also the E100 not being able to overmatch its turret. Like, it will still not be able to overmatch the turret, but it will hopefully be able to get more shots off and potentially do more damage in a shorter time period than the 60TP. That's my general thinking behind that. So that would be the last of the changes that I would make to the E100. So next up is the T110E4, and I've actually written these changes down because, well, I wanted to get them right and didn't want to get them like ballsed up in some shape or form. So first thing on the T110E4, I'll start off with the armor as well. I would up this armor here. This armor here to the left and the right of the gun mantlet. I would up this from 203mm to 254mm of armor. In other words, basically make it the same as this gun mantlet that the tank has here. And the reason for that there is pretty much because this area of armor here is such a problem for this tank. It's essentially penetrable to tier 8s from the front, even when it's covering its hull. And also it has this massive weakness as well, but I'll get to that in a minute. Upping this here to 254mm, in my opinion, would make the tank's just survivability go up substantially, and it would also make it more relevant. What's the best way to like phrase this? It would make it more in line with what the T30 was like. In other words, it would have a very strong turret, but it would still have like some weaknesses at the top. Like the T30 had the cupola, this thing here has a substantially bigger cupola, but when it comes to this cupola, I would say this here should actually be like 185mm, maybe 200mm thick. Wouldn't go any higher than that because I think going any higher than that would make it ridiculous. But yeah, I think overall buffing the turret front and the cupola weakness, I think would make the tank a lot more survivable, and it would make it so that it feels a little bit more in line with the playstyles you were dealing with previously. Although I will say the T110E4 is probably the T110E4 line is probably one of the last really inconsistent lines in World of Tanks, because you go from the T28 prototype, which relies almost totally on its frontal armor, to the T30, which relies almost totally on its turret, to this thing here, which relies on neither and can't really tank. It seems like a bizarre change of pace in each circumstance. So when it comes to the lower front plate, I would leave it the same, wouldn't change that, because I think removing all weaknesses is a terrible idea, and in my opinion this here would still be a weakness you could exploit. It would just be a little bit trickier to penetrate reliably. And also the front turret would still be susceptible to things like premium rounds, as an example. So trying to just up its effectiveness a bit without making it just downright overpowered. Next thing, the gun. So I wouldn't actually change the rate of fire on this gun, because I don't think it's a good idea to have a 295 pen gun with like a faster rate of fire than it already has. Like it wouldn't be too much of a problem if the tank had like a casement based design, but it's in the turreted line. It will always have that partial turret. So basically in my head, I don't think I can justify changing the rate of fire. So what I would do is I would change the aiming time from 2.9 seconds probably down to about 2.5 seconds, and change the accuracy from 0.37 down to probably about 0.34. And those are like the base stats, not the stats with like the equipment and stuff involved. Like this here would probably go down to about 2.3, 2.2 second aiming time. But bear in mind, these stats here will still neuter that aiming time and still make it a lot more awkward to play than you would initially expect from that sort of aiming time. And the accuracy would just help a lot whenever it comes to the just overall bloom of the reticle whenever you're aiming at a target after moving the tank or rotating the turret or anything like that. That's my general opinions on that. And if the vehicle still winded up being underpowered after all those changes, I would say the last thing you would change would be the gun depression from 6 degrees to 8. I wouldn't go any higher than that, because if you go to 8 degrees of gun depression, then I think the vehicle would become too flexible, and it would basically just end up having the same role as this thing. So yeah, that's just my general thoughts on the T110E4 in comparison to this thing. So last up is the 705A, and this one's actually got probably the fastest overall changes that I would make. First thing, I would change the overall DPM with all this equipment stuff. By the way, all these numbers that I'm talking about are with full equipment setups and brothers in arms. The best possible DPM I would say that this thing should be capable of is about 2700, which is about a 14.4 second reload. So that would bring it up close to where the DeanoGTO is, but it would still be pretty far off from the E100. But this thing here would also get a substantial armor buff for the side. And it also has this godlike turret, which is one of the thickest turrets in the game. So the only thing I would really want to change on this armor, which would help this thing out substantially, is I would change this side armor from 100mm to 120. Just to give you some context on how much of a change that would be. And also you might be looking at this going like, why on earth would you buff this? It looks insane already. Well, here's the thing. If you manage to get a shot between the tracks and the side armor, or between the tracks and the space armor I should say, then it's really easy to penetrate. Also, you don't even need to do that. Literally this entire area here is like 200mm, which is penetrable to like a Tiger 1, to give you context. The difference in side armor would be the difference between an IS-7's side armor, which is incredibly limited in terms of its threshold for angling. If you go like 1 degree over the angle for an IS-7, it becomes penetrable to everything. Meanwhile, if you have an E75, it's a lot more flexible, and it's a lot easier to get the angle right for an E75, because you have like about 3-4 degrees like leeway in terms of the angling, so you don't go too far over it, or you don't go under it. Well, it's impossible to under angle. If you go too far, if you over angle the hull too far, it's a lot more likely to still bounce shots. Meanwhile, this thing here just does not have that luxury at the moment. So that would be the last change I would actually make to this tank, because I honestly do think that would fix the bulk of the issues this tank has. Maybe up the spaced armor value for the tracks to 40mm, given that it is a 100-ton tank. So I think that would probably be the last thing I would want to change for this thing as well. Just up this 20mm spaced armor to 40, and up the side armor to 120 from 100. That could be a bit too far, but I think that would probably be about as far as you would want to go. So yeah, let me know what you guys think of those changes. I wrote them down and like did some working out with a calculator there, just to work out what the DPM figures would work out to be. So let me know what you guys think. What would the effect of these changes be? Do you think they would be too much, or do you think they would be too little? And also, if you have any ideas that you would put forward to wargaming, if you could. Like, I have no influence on wargaming or anything like that. This is just my like general thoughts on like what I would do. If you had any ideas on like certain vehicles that you would change in some shape or form to make them more competitive in today's meta, what would you do? And like, try and make changes realistic. Don't make them like ridiculous. Like I tried to do that. The only ones which I feel like are ridiculous potentially are the DPM changes to the E100. I think that could be a little bit too far for wargaming to do. They're probably more likely to do about 2850 DPM rather than 2888, which is what I had. So let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.